this after North Korea fired its second missile over Japan less than a month. I mean, they could see this thing. To Hudson Institute senior fellow Rebeccah Heinrichs. Rebeccah, seems every time we get together, there's a new missile launch here. But the one thing I always worry about, and I, expressed to you before, is the possibility of an accident, that this lands on land, a missile that goes off course, and hits people, hits land. Well, then all bets are off, right?
Right. I mean, this was highly provocative. Another missile, of course, that flew over Japan. So even if it breaks up in the atmosphere, the debris can fall down on unsuspecting Japanese civilians. Of course, we have American forces deployed there, so it's very reckless. It's important, though, to understand that the North Koreans aren't irrational. They're reckless. They're cruel, but they're not crazy. And so,
what would they respond to? I agree with that. I mean, I would think that they must know that threatening to blow up the world only assures their own destruction. But having said that, what would get their attention? Apparently, nothing approaching the severest of sanctions, at least that we've seen in generations, does the trick. So what would?
Well, so this, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that this is a pressure campaign the administration is implementing. And a couple of months ago, he indicated that he said if there was a dial on this pressure campaign, we're at a 5 or a 6. Assuming that dial goes up to 10, they've got a lot more up their sleeves. This is it's a psychological situation that we're in with the North Koreans. The North Koreans need to understand, as well as the Chinese, that the United States factually will not allow the North Koreans to have a credible capability to threaten us with a nuclear weapon. They have to be made to understand that we are willing to use force to do that, which means we are willing to squeeze the regime so hard and squeeze China and implement secondary sanctions if they don't.
That isn't force. That isn't force, right? I mean, that obviously, I think you're right. To go after China, the hand that feeds them would be a step in that direction. But force would be some military action against them, right? Or to shoot down a missile, or to shoot down a base of operations, much as Israel did back in 1980 with Iraq. I mean, would we see or entertain anything seriously like that?
We have to. I mean, I think that right now, what the North Koreans don't want is the same thing that the Chinese don't want, and that is for the United States to invade North Korea and unify the peninsula. That is what they don't want. And so, we need to try everything. And Secretary Tillerson has made it quite clear that is not the objective here. The United States does not want regime change. We simply don't want to be threatened with a nuclear ballistic missile. And so both the Chinese, again, and the North Koreans need to be made to know that we will, though, use force if the alternative.
But aren't we sounding like the boy who cried wolf? That once again a UN assembly urgent meeting after every test, you can almost time it. But the North Koreans must read to that. You're not going to do anything, and so they keep calling our bluff. What would the bluff response be then? Well,
I think if the North Koreans decided to launch one of these missiles at Guam, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, the President of the United States are going to have a very different response than what we've seen with these launches over Japan.
It would take that. In other words, it would take the North Koreans upping the ante beyond these errant missile launchings over sky and into water, right?
Well, that would be my analysis. I mean, I'm not privy to the conversations, right, of course, and no administration official is declaring these red lines. If you've noticed, President Trump has even gotten very quiet ever since that fire and fury comment, because we need to have some space here to maneuver politically with the Chinese and, of course, with the Russians in implementing these sanctions. But again, this is a pressure campaign. We're trying to convince the North Koreans, and the Chinese are nervous because even with sanctions, you can get to the point where you upset the regime in North Korea. Which has the same consequence almost as military force. And so it is this gradual tightening, sanctioning to get to the point where the North Koreans cry uncle and then say, forget it. We don't want to test these missiles anymore. We'll come to the table. We want sanctions relief. That is the hope right now. That's what we're trying to do, because we're trying to prevent force. I don't know what they're getting,
save some stuff from the Chinese, but nothing seems to work. So maybe that's a sign that they're going to tough it out no matter what happens, because they, for now, can.
It's foreboding. It doesn't look good, and that's why this now tough talk directed now towards the Chinese with secondary sanctions is important. One more thing I would note too: it is so critical for the Trump administration to show ironclad commitments to both the Japanese and the South Koreans. You and I have talked about this before. If the Japanese start losing confidence in the United States nuclear umbrella and protection of the Japanese, they will seek their own deterrent capabilities. We don't want that. We don't want to increase proliferation even among our allies.
China doesn't want that. That might be the most most distressing development for the Chinese that Japan could be remilitarizing as a result.
And the South Koreans have having their own nuclear capability is growing in popularity, which is why I would also advise, the Trump administration, if it were up to me, I would advise to hold this, having a renegotiations between the United States and the South Koreans with our trade deal. It's important. I think it's out of priority. It's out of whack. I would put that on hold until we get the situation with the North Koreans under control.